Dr. Sophia Caldwell bought ancient Khmer ruins for $2 at a government land auction in Phnom Penh, where internationally renowned archaeologists and billionaire artifact collectors sat in deafening silence, watching her bid on what should have been the archaeological discovery of the century. But when the auctioneer's gavel fell, nobody offered congratulations. Instead, they stared at her with the hollow expressions of people witnessing a tragedy they were powerless to prevent. The ruins sprawled across 22 acres of dense Cambodian jungle, featuring 4 towering temple complexes, intricate stone bas-reliefs depicting unknown deities, and what the Ministry of Culture's official survey optimistically described as unprecedented archaeological significance with potential to rewrite Southeast Asian history. The original minimum bid had been set at $75,000, a bargain for such a historically significant site. But a mysterious clerical oversight, discovered just hours before the auction, had somehow reduced the starting price to exactly $2. Dr. Sophia Caldwell shifted uncomfortably in her plastic chair inside the sweltering government building in Phnom Penh's administrative district. The antiquated air conditioning unit wheezed pathetically against the oppressive Cambodian heat, doing little more than circulating the humid air that seemed to stick to everything like invisible molasses. Around her, the room buzzed with quiet conversations in at least 6 different languages, as some of the world's most prestigious archaeological institutions and wealthiest private collectors prepared for what should have been a fierce bidding war. She recognized several faces from international conferences. Dr. Heinrich Zimmermann from the Berlin Archaeological Institute, whose excavations in Turkey had made global headlines. Professor Liu Wei from Beijing University, whose work on ancient Silk Road sites had earned her a Nobel Prize nomination. James Morrison, the eccentric British billionaire who had personally funded 3 major excavations in Egypt and owned one of the world's most extensive private collections of ancient artifacts. These were people who routinely spent millions of dollars on archaeological projects. Morrison alone had reportedly paid $12 million for a single Egyptian sarcophagus at a private auction in London. The idea that any of them would pass up the opportunity to own an entire unexplored Khmer temple complex for the price of a cup of coffee was not just unlikely, it was impossible. Yet when auctioneer Pisak Sovanarith, a thin, nervous man whose wire-rimmed glasses kept sliding down his perspiring nose, cleared his throat and called for opening bids, something extraordinary happened. Nothing. The room, which moments before had been alive with animated discussions about excavation permits and research proposals, fell into a silence so complete that Sophia could hear the individual clicks of the ceiling fan's motor struggling against its worn bearings. She looked around, expecting someone to jump in with an opening bid. Morrison was checking his phone. Dr. Zimmermann was staring intently at his hands. Professor Liu Wei appeared to be studying the water stains on the ceiling with the focus of someone examining ancient hieroglyphs. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pisak repeated, his voice cracking slightly, "we have Lot 47, the Priya Vihir archaeological complex, consisting of 4 major temple structures dating to the 11th century Angkor period, located in Ratanakiri province. The starting bid has been set at $2. He seemed to choke on the words, as if saying them caused him physical pain. Sophia raised her hand before she could think better of it. $2. The reaction was immediate and disturbing. Every head in the room turned toward her, but instead of the competitive glares she expected from fellow bidders, she saw something that made her stomach clench with sudden anxiety. The expressions weren't angry or envious, they were sympathetic, pitying, the kind of looks reserved for terminal patients or people walking unknowingly toward a cliff edge. Pisac's gavel hung frozen in the air above his wooden block. His eyes darted frantically around the room, silently pleading with someone, anyone, to challenge Sophia's bid. Beads of sweat that had nothing to do with the oppressive heat rolled down his temples. Going once, he said weakly, the words barely audible above the laboring air conditioning unit. Dr. Elena Vasquez, seated directly to Sophia's left, suddenly grabbed her arm with surprising strength. Elena was a legend in Mesoamerican archaeology, famous for her groundbreaking work at Chichen Itza and her fearless expeditions into previously unexplored jungle sites. If anyone understood the value of an untouched archaeological site, it was Elena. "Don't do this, Mia," Elena whispered urgently, her weathered face creased with genuine concern. "Some discoveries aren't worth making. Trust me on this one." But before Sophia could ask what she meant, Pisac's gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the humid air far longer than physics should have allowed. "Sold to Dr. Caldwell for $2, he announced, his voice hollow with what sounded suspiciously like grief. The immediate aftermath was unlike any auction Sophia had ever witnessed. Instead of the usual post-sale chaos of congratulations, networking, and deal-making, the room began to empty with an urgency that bordered on panic. Chairs scraped against the concrete floor as dozens of internationally respected academics and wealthy collectors gathered their belongings and headed for the exits as quickly as dignity would allow. But they weren't just leaving, they were fleeing. Professor Liu Wei, who had been sitting 3 rows ahead, turned back to look at Sophia as she reached the doorway. The expression on the Nobel Prize nominee's face was one of genuine sorrow, as if she were attending a funeral for someone she'd known and respected. Morrison, the billionaire collector, paused at his seat long enough to shake his head slowly while looking directly at Sophia. "Should have listened to the warnings," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. "Some things are buried for good reason." As Sophia made her way toward the auction official's desk to complete her paperwork, fragments of hushed conversations drifted through the air like smoke from a dying fire, told her not to bid. "But you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. 23 years since the last expedition tried to excavate there. Found Dr. Rathman's equipment scattered all over the jungle, but never found Dr. Rathman. Government sealed those ruins for a reason, and it wasn't to protect ancient stones." Each whispered comment made Sophia's growing unease more acute. Dr. Rathman, she knew that name. Professor Amara Rathman had been one of the most respected archaeologists of the previous generation, famous for her meticulous excavation techniques and her ability to extract information from sites that other researchers had given up on as picked clean. Rathman had disappeared during a research expedition in the early 2000s. Her disappearance had been attributed to the dangers of working in remote jungle locations, wild animals, tropical diseases, accidents that could happen to anyone working far from civilization. But now these fragments suggested something far more disturbing. They implied that Rathman's disappearance was connected to this specific site, and that it hadn't been an accident. Pisac handed her the deed and ownership documents with hands that visibly trembled. The papers were official, bearing multiple government seals and signatures, but something about the man's demeanor suggested he was handing her a death warrant rather than property documents. "Congratulations, Dr. Caldwell," he said, avoiding eye contact. When she tried to ask him about the site's history and previous research attempts, he simply shook his head and walked away without another word, leaving her standing alone in the rapidly emptying room. That's when Sophia noticed the most unsettling detail of all. Through the building's grimy windows, she could see that none of the auction attendees were actually leaving. Their cars and taxis remained parked outside, but instead of getting into them and departing, they were gathering in small groups on the sidewalk, waiting, watching the building's entrance. They were waiting to see what she would do next, as if they expected something to happen, something that had happened before. Dr. Elena Vasquez emerged from the building and approached Sophia's rental car just as she was loading her new property documents into her backpack. "Sophia, listen to me carefully," Elena said, glancing around nervously before continuing. "That site isn't just archaeologically significant, it's dangerous. Not dangerous like watch out for snakes and malaria's dangerous. Dangerous like people who go there don't come back dangerous." "What are you talking about?" "It's a Khmer temple complex. I've excavated dozens of similar sites." "No, you haven't," Elena replied firmly. "You've never excavated anything like Priyavai here. Nobody has, because nobody who's tried has lived to publish their findings." Elena pulled out her phone and showed Sophia a photograph. It depicted a group of 5 archaeologists standing in front of what appeared to be ancient stone ruins, partially hidden by jungle vegetation. The image quality suggested it had been taken in the early 2000s. "Dr. Rathman's team," Elena explained, "the last official expedition to attempt excavation at your new property. They had permits, funding, local guides, satellite communication equipment, and emergency evacuation protocols. They were as prepared as any archaeological expedition has ever been." Elena swiped to the next photo. It showed the same location, but now the campsite was abandoned. Tents stood empty. Equipment lay scattered across the jungle floor, and there was no sign of human presence. This photo was taken 3 weeks later by the search and rescue team. No bodies were ever found, no evidence of what happened to them. The site was immediately classified as off-limits by the Cambodian government, and it's been sealed ever since. Sealed how? Concrete barriers blocking the main temple entrances. Armed guards posted on rotating shifts. Satellite surveillance. The kind of security you'd expect around a military installation, not ancient ruins. Sophia studied the photographs more carefully. In the background of the first image, she could make out carved stone structures that looked unlike any Khmer architecture she'd ever seen. The proportions were wrong, the decorative motifs unfamiliar. Most disturbing of all, the stones appeared to be a different color than typical Angkor period construction, almost black rather than the usual gray limestone. "Elena, those ruins in the background, they don't look like 11th century Khmer construction." "No," Elena agreed grimly, "they don't, which is exactly why Dr. Raman's team was so excited to excavate there, and exactly why they're probably dead." The helicopter flight from Phnom Penh to Ratanakiri province took Dr. Sophia Caldwell over some of the most remote and pristine jungle territory left on Earth. Her pilot, Captain Virek Mirlea, was a former military aviator whose weather-beaten face and steady hands suggested decades of flying over dangerous terrain. But as they approached the coordinates listed on her property deed, she noticed his typical professional composure beginning to crack. "Dr. Caldwell," Virek said through the helicopter's communication system, his voice tight with concern, "are you absolutely certain about these coordinates? I've been flying over this region for 15 years, and I've never been asked to land at this location. Why not? Because it's been designated as a no-fly zone since 2003. Military restriction. I had to file special paperwork and get approval from 3 different government ministries just to bring you here today." As they crested a jungle-covered ridge, the Priya archaeological complex emerged from the green canopy, like something from another world. 4 massive temple structures rose above the trees, their dark stone surfaces covered in intricate carvings that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the tropical sunlight. Unlike the warm grey limestone of Angkor Wat or other famous Khmer sites, these temples appeared to be constructed from some kind of black stone that Sophia didn't recognize. But it was the scale of the complex that truly took her breath away. The temples were enormous, easily rivaling Angkor Wat in size and complexity, yet she'd never seen them referenced in any archaeological literature. How could such massive and obviously significant structures have remained essentially unknown to the international archaeological community? Virek set the helicopter down on a small clearing that had been carved out of the jungle, probably by Raman's expedition 2 decades earlier. The moment they touched ground, Sophia felt something she'd never experienced at any other archaeological site in her 15-year career. A sense of profound wrongness, as if the very air around the temples carried a warning that spoke directly to some primitive part of her brain. "I'll wait here with the aircraft," Virek announced, making no move to shut down the engine. "How long do you need?" "Give me 2 hours to do an initial survey." 1 hour, he countered firmly. "This place, it doesn't feel right." 1 hour, then we leave. Sophia gathered her equipment and approached the nearest temple structure. As she drew closer, the details of the construction became even more puzzling. The stonework was flawless, with joints so tight that she couldn't slide a piece of paper between the blocks. But the architectural style was unlike anything in her experience. The proportions were subtly wrong, as if designed by people with a fundamentally different understanding of spatial relationships. The carvings that covered every surface were even more disturbing. At first glance, they appeared to depict the usual Khmer themes of gods, kings and religious ceremonies. But closer examination revealed details that made no sense within the context of known Cambodian history. Figures wore clothing and ornaments that belonged to no identifiable culture. They carried tools and weapons that seemed to incorporate technological elements that shouldn't have existed in the 11th century. Most unsettling of all, many of the carved faces bore expressions of terror, as if the artisans had been depicting something that genuinely frightened them. As she rounded the corner of the largest temple, Sophia discovered what had probably been Dr. Raman's base camp. 20 years of jungle growth had nearly reclaimed the site, but she could still make out the foundations of several large tents, the remains of a generator platform, and scattered pieces of archaeological equipment that the jungle hadn't yet completely consumed. But it was what she found at the base of the main temple that stopped her cold. A section of the temple's foundation had been excavated, revealing what appeared to be an entrance to underground chambers. But the opening had been sealed with modern concrete, poured so recently that she could still smell the chemical tang of curing cement mixing with the humid jungle air. Someone had been here within the last few months, working to ensure that whatever lay beneath the temple would remain permanently inaccessible. Fresh concrete meant recent human activity, which meant someone was still actively monitoring and maintaining this site, despite its official designation as abandoned and off-limits. Sophia circled the sealed entrance, taking photographs and notes. The concrete barrier was thick, professionally installed, and reinforced with steel rebar. This wasn't a hasty patch job, meant to keep out casual trespassers. This was serious construction, designed to permanently prevent access to whatever lay beneath the temple. But why? What could be down there that was worth such extreme measures? As she knelt to examine the seal more closely, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Embedded in the concrete, barely visible, unless you knew exactly where to look, were what appeared to be fragments of modern equipment. A piece of a radio antenna, part of what looked like a satellite phone, and what was unmistakably a fragment of a university identification badge. Dr. Raman's team hadn't just disappeared from this site, they'd been entombed beneath it. Movement in her peripheral vision made Sophia look up sharply from her examination of the concrete seal. On the ridge that overlooked the temple complex, perhaps half a mile away, a figure stood silhouetted against the afternoon sky. Even at that distance, she could tell the person was watching her through binoculars and had been positioned to monitor the entire archaeological site. When their eyes met across the jungle valley, the figure immediately stepped back into the tree line, but not before Sophia caught a glimpse of military-style camouflage clothing and what appeared to be sophisticated communication equipment. This wasn't some curious local villager or lost tourist. This was professional surveillance. Someone had been keeping watch on these ruins, probably for years. The question was who and why. Captain Varak appeared at her shoulder, having followed her from the helicopter landing site, despite his obvious reluctance to leave the aircraft. When he saw what she was examining, his face went pale beneath his deep tan. "Dr. Caldwell, we need to leave immediately," he said urgently, his eyes darting between the sealed temple entrance and the ridge where the watcher had been positioned. "Why? What aren't you telling me about this place?" Varak glanced nervously around the temple complex, as if expecting to see other observers emerging from the jungle. The last archaeological team that came here wasn't just interested in Khmer history. They claimed they'd found evidence of much older structures beneath the temple foundations, structures that shouldn't exist according to everything we know about ancient Cambodian civilizations. What kind of structures? Dr. Raman's preliminary reports, before she disappeared, mentioned finding construction techniques and materials that didn't match any known historical period. She claimed the underground chambers showed evidence of advanced engineering that predated the Khmer Empire by thousands of years. Sophia felt her excitement building despite the ominous circumstances. Advanced how? Precision stonework that required tools and techniques that supposedly didn't exist in ancient Southeast Asia. Metallurgy that our best modern laboratories couldn't replicate. And Varak hesitated, clearly struggling with whether to continue. And what? Inscriptions in languages that don't match any known writing system from this region. Dr. Raman's team brought in linguists from 5 different universities. None of them could identify the script, but they all agreed on one thing: The inscriptions appeared to be far more sophisticated than anything that should have existed here 3,000 years ago. The implications were staggering. If Raman had really discovered evidence of an advanced ancient civilization in Cambodia, it would revolutionize understanding of prehistoric Southeast Asia. It would also explain why the site had been sealed and placed under military guard. So the government shut down the excavation to suppress the findings. The government shut down the excavation because 3 days after Dr. Raman filed her preliminary report, her entire team vanished without a trace. Virak corrected grimly, and 12 hours after that, government forces arrived with concrete trucks and construction equipment to permanently seal the site. In the distance, Sophia could hear the distinctive whoop-whoop-whoop of helicopter rotors approaching. But this wasn't the sound of a single aircraft like the one that had brought her here. This was multiple helicopters, moving in formation. Military patrol, Virak identified, his pilot's trained ear, recognizing the signature immediately. They conduct regular overflights of this area, but they're not supposed to land unless there's an emergency. The sound was getting closer, and through the jungle canopy, Sophia could see the dark shapes of 3 helicopters moving directly toward their position. They know we're here, she realized. Of course they know we're here, Virak replied, already moving toward their aircraft. This entire site is under satellite surveillance. The moment we landed, automated systems probably alerted every relevant government ministry in Phnom Penh, but Sophia wasn't moving toward the helicopter. Instead, she was pulling out her camera and taking as many photographs as possible of the sealed temple entrance, the embedded equipment fragments, and the surrounding structures. Dr. Caldwell, Virak called urgently. We have perhaps 3 minutes before those helicopters arrive. If we're still on the ground when they get here, we may not be leaving at all. Just give me 2 more minutes. Dr. Ratman probably said the same thing 20 years ago. The comment stopped Sophia cold. She looked at the concrete seal, at the equipment fragments that might be all that remained of 5 respected archaeologists, and at the approaching helicopters that were closing the distance with military precision. For the first time since winning the auction, she truly understood what Elena had been trying to tell her. This wasn't just about archaeological discoveries or academic prestige. This was about forces powerful enough to make an entire research team disappear, and then spend 2 decades ensuring their silence remained permanent. As she ran toward the helicopter, Sophia's mind raced with the implications of what she'd discovered. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide whatever lay beneath these temples. They'd murdered an entire archaeological team, sealed the site with military-grade security, and maintained round-the-clock surveillance for 20 years. The question was whether she would live long enough to find out what ancient civilization's secrets were worth killing for, and more importantly, whether the approaching helicopters were coming to escort her safely away from the site, or to make sure she joined Dr. Ratman's team in whatever fate had befallen them beneath tons of freshly poured concrete. The 3 military helicopters touched down in perfect formation, surrounding Sophia and Virak's aircraft in a tactical pattern that made escape impossible. Armed soldiers emerged immediately, their weapons trained not on Sophia, but on the sealed temple entrance behind her, as if they expected something to emerge from the concrete barrier. A tall figure in civilian clothes stepped out of the lead helicopter. Colonel Boffa Rethisak, according to the identification he showed Sophia, though his expensive suit and soft hands suggested he spent more time in government offices than military bases. Behind him came Dr. Chen Weiming, a woman Sophia recognized from international archaeological conferences, and Professor James Morrison, the same billionaire collector who had refused to bid at the auction. Caldwell, Colonel Rethersack said pleasantly, "I'm afraid your visit here constitutes a violation of national security protocols. This site has been classified as restricted since 2003. I have legal ownership documents," Sophia replied, though her confidence was rapidly evaporating. The property was sold at a government auction. Morrison stepped forward, his expression grim. That auction was supposed to fail. The starting price was deliberately set impossibly low, because we assumed no legitimate archaeologist would be foolish enough to bid on a site with Priya V. Here's reputation. Dr. Chen Weiming moved closer to the sealed temple entrance, examining Sophia's photographs on her camera with professional interest. She's documented the embedded equipment fragments. She knows about Ratman's team. Then she understands the stakes, Colonel Rethersack observed. Dr. Caldwell, what you've discovered here isn't just archaeologically significant, it's a matter of global security. 6. The revelation cascade. Virak, who had been quietly positioning himself near their helicopter's controls, suddenly spoke up. "Tell her about the others, Colonel. Tell her about all the teams that have disappeared from sites like this one." Rethersack's composure cracked slightly. "Captain Mialaya, you're exceeding your authority." "My authority?" Virak laughed bitterly. "I've been flying researchers to remote sites for 15 years. I've seen the pattern. Cambodia, Thailand, Myanmar, Laos. Anywhere ancient construction shows technological advancement that doesn't fit historical timelines. Research teams arrive, make discoveries, then vanish." Dr. Chen Weiming pulled out a tablet and showed Sophia satellite images spanning 2 decades, 17 sites across Southeast Asia, each one featuring architecture or inscriptions that suggest civilizations far more advanced than previously believed possible, each one now sealed and under military protection. "Why?" Sophia demanded. "What are you so afraid people will discover?" Morrison answered, his voice heavy with something that sounded like regret. "Evidence that human civilization followed a completely different trajectory than everything we've been taught. Dr. Ratman's team didn't just find advanced construction techniques, they found technology." He gestured toward the sealed temple entrance. "Beneath that concrete are chambers containing devices that shouldn't exist, machines that still function after 3,000 years, inscriptions that aren't just writing, they're technical manuals describing scientific principles that we're only beginning to understand today." The implications hit Sophia like a physical blow. "You're talking about suppressing evidence of ancient advanced technology. We're talking about preventing global panic," Colonel Rethersack corrected. "Imagine the social, religious and economic upheaval if the world learned that human civilization achieved spaceflight, quantum computing, and genetic engineering thousands of years ago, then somehow lost all that knowledge." Dr. Chen Weiming added, "The inscriptions Ratman's team translated before they died described contact with others, non-human intelligence, that shared knowledge with ancient Earth civilizations before departing, leaving only these technological repositories behind." 7. The pressure cooker. The sound of additional helicopters approaching made everyone freeze. Through the jungle canopy, Sophia could see larger aircraft approaching, transport helicopters carrying what appeared to be construction equipment, concrete trucks. Virak identified grimly, "They're not just here to escort us away, they're here to bury this site permanently." Colonel Rethasak checked his watch. "Dr. Caldwell, you have a choice. Join our organization, help us manage these discoveries responsibly, and live comfortably on a government salary while contributing to carefully controlled research. Or," he gestured toward the concrete trucks being unloaded from the transport helicopters. Morrison stepped closer to Sophia. 23 years ago, I was just like you, young, idealistic, convinced that archaeological truth should be shared with the world. Then I found a site in Myanmar that contained a functioning power source that had been running continuously for over 2 millennia. The day I published my preliminary findings, my entire family received death threats from organizations I'd never heard of. So you joined them. I became them," Morrison corrected. "Someone has to manage these discoveries. Better people who understand their significance than government bureaucrats who only see them as threats to social stability." Dr. Chen Weiming was examining something on her tablet with growing alarm. "Colonel, we have a problem." Dr. Caldwell's helicopter flight was being tracked by multiple satellite systems. Academic institutions in 12 countries now have GPS coordinates for this site. The news hit the group like a thunderbolt. Sophia realized she'd inadvertently triggered something far larger than her own survival. "How long before other teams arrive?" Rethasak demanded. "International expeditions could be here within 48 hours, Chen replied. Dr. Caldwell's auction purchase was public record. Her flight plan was filed with civil aviation authorities. We can't make this disappear quietly." The resolution and transformation. Morrison turned to face Sophia with something resembling respect. "Congratulations, Dr. Caldwell. You've just accomplished something that none of us thought was possible. You've made suppression of these sites politically untenable." Colonel Rethasak was speaking rapidly into his radio, coordinating with what appeared to be high-level government officials. When he finished, his expression had changed completely. "New orders," he announced. "The site is to be unsealed and prepared for controlled international inspection. Caldwell will lead a multinational research team under strict security protocols." Sophia could hardly believe what she was hearing. "You're going to allow the excavation? We're going to allow carefully managed disclosure," Morrison clarified. "The truth was always going to come out eventually. Too many sites, too many discoveries, too many questions from the international academic community. Better to control the revelation than have it exposed chaotically." Dr. Chen Weiming was already coordinating with the construction teams. "Instead of pouring concrete, we'll be removing it. The chamber beneath this temple will become humanity's first official investigation into prehistoric advanced technology." Virak, who had remained quietly suspicious throughout the confrontation, finally smiled. So Dr. Caldwell's $2 investment just became the key to rewriting human history. "More than that," Morrison replied, watching as soldiers began setting up what appeared to be a permanent research station around the temple complex. "She's become the public face of humanity's first official acknowledgement that we've been visited by advanced intelligence before." 6 months later, Dr. Sophia Caldwell stood before the United Nations General Assembly, presenting findings that had already begun reshaping humanity's understanding of its own past. The Priya site had yielded technology that promised revolutionary advances in energy production, medical science, and space exploration. But more importantly, The ancient inscriptions had revealed that Earth had been part of a vast interstellar network of civilizations thousands of years ago, and that the knowledge repositories hidden in sites around the world were intended as an inheritance for when humanity was ready to rejoin that cosmic community. Her $2 purchase hadn't just bought her ancient ruins, it had bought humanity a ticket back to the stars. The sealed chambers contain star maps, showing the locations of other inhabited worlds, communication devices designed to contact civilizations that might still exist among distant stars, and most remarkably, an invitation. The ancient texts made it clear that when Earth's civilization advanced enough to rediscover and understand these technological gifts, the original teachers would return. As Sophia concluded her presentation to the assembled world leaders, she reflected on the strange chain of events that had started with an impossibly cheap auction in Phnom Penh. She'd thought she was buying archaeological property, but she'd actually purchased the key to humanity's cosmic heritage. The $2 had been the best investment in human history. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of discovery and transformation. If you enjoyed this story of courage, ancient mysteries, and humanity's hidden heritage, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more amazing tales that reveal the extraordinary truths hidden in our world. Your support helps us bring you these captivating stories every week.